I'm at Hurst Priory. Built in the 18th century, this country house is in the parish of Belton on the Isle of Axholme. The Priory is a really charming, historic, award-winning events and weddings venue located in some beautiful grounds. My name is Paul Holloway, and today I'm going to be presenting 2 sessions on press release tips. Let's start with general press releases, and in the second part, we're going to be looking at press releases directed especially at radio. First thing you need to think of before you start writing your press release is, what is the story? You also need to create a media list that you're going to distribute to. We're going to have a look at some good practice and format, and then talk about the other essentials you need to include: photos and contact details. So let's start with the story. Do you have a newsworthy story in the first place? Having a refurb or launching a new menu isn't really going to cut it. That's not the sort of thing that people are going to be interested in. But you need to try and find an angle that's going to draw in your audience. So human interest is a great place to start. If you're doing a charity event, then maybe talking to somebody who's taking part, who has direct experience of the charity. So it's a cancer charity, maybe they're doing something for a relative who's passed away. That can suddenly take your story on to the next level. What's the motivation? Why are we interested? Another way to hook people into your story is by the use of VIPs and celebrities. Now, you don't have to book Tom Cruise. It can be local dignitaries. It could be the local football team. Scunthorpe United turn up, and all of a sudden, people are interested. You could also look at using some sort of novelty gimmick. So if you're having a fun day, maybe there's a world record attempt or something like that. Good idea is to try and find an angle to a bigger story. So for example, if you wanted to talk about your business breakfast club, rather than saying, here at Hurst Priory, business leaders from all over Lincolnshire are meeting up once a month, it's a little bit dry, isn't it? The lead story should be a report from the Chamber of Commerce is showing that footfall in Lincolnshire towns has increased, or something about unemployment, something that people are going to be more interested in, a hook that you can then tie your story to and talk about the event that's happening at your venue. Think who would be interested and why, and try to make sure that your story is going to grab people's attention. If you want to distribute a press release, then the first thing you need to do after you've identified your story is create a distribution list. So think which platforms, which media are going to be interested. Television, newspapers, radio, magazine, digital media, online, trade press, podcasts. There's lots of different avenues that may or may not be interested in your story, depending on what it is. You then need to get contact details for everybody on your media list. So rather than sending it to news@, if you can get an individual journalist's name and send the information on to them, and also send it to the info@ or news@ address as well, then you're more likely to get a response. Make sure you're sending out your press release in good time. All newsrooms will be planning content ahead weeks in advance. So there's nothing wrong with sending it early and maybe sending it again nearer the time. You can also follow up your press release with another email or a phone call just to see if it's a story that might be of interest to some of your key media outlets. So what to look for in your press release? How long should it be? Well, as a guide, approximately 300 words. A good press release can be copied and published with minimal editing. You've got to remember, particularly in local newspapers, there's not as many journalists working on those titles as there were 10, 20 years ago. So if you can give them a good story that needs little or minimal editing, they're more likely to use it. But remember, this is a press release. It's not an advert, so you need to make sure the style and the tone of your press release is fairly objective. Make sure you're mentioning your business and make sure you're saying it in a positive light, but if you go too far over the top, they're less likely to use it. Make sure you include in your press release any key dates. You can, of course, embargo information that won't be published until after that date if you want to try and get a maximum splash. Or if you've got particular events that are happening, you need to make sure that is included in your press release. Is your story time sensitive? Also, make sure you include additional information. Typically, this is known as notes to editor. So it could be some bullet points where they could find out more information about your organization or your story or partners you're working with. And you must include your contact details so that journalists can get back to you if they would like any more information. So how do you write a good press release? Starting with a strong headline. Try and make it succinct and it's going to grab attention. Your lead paragraph needs to be a concise summary of what the story is and why your audience should care. You can then back that up in the second and third paragraph with more detail and painting a bit of a picture about your story. You can add quotes to give your story personality and credibility. So for example, if you were sending a press release in about a local charity, you could have some personal information from somebody affected by cancer or Alzheimer's or whatever the particular charity was, talking about their motivation to do this fundraising event and how their relative and what it means to them. That's the sort of thing that can hook people in and make people interested in the story. Credibility. If you had business leaders in for your business monthly meeting, then you could get some quotes from 3 or 4 different businesses that you could include in your press release. That gives it more gravitas and makes it a bigger story. Remember, a well-structured press release can be cut and make sense at any time. So taking out a whole paragraph and it still makes sense, that's a good feature to have in there. Remember that journalists are time poor. If you can do their job well for them, they're more likely to pick up your press release, tweak it slightly, and run with it. Don't forget to include photography. If you're using photography from your business that a professional photographer has given to you in the past, make sure that they're credited. Make sure any individuals who are in the photography you're supplying with your press release are named left to right so that when they appear in a newspaper or a magazine that we can get their details correct. You've got to supply your contact details as well. It means a journalist can pick up the phone and query any points or maybe ask you for more questions. Don't forget to include links to additional information. And if you can build a relationship with key journalists on local newspapers, radio, it's that opportunity that when you get a story, they're more likely to run it. So picking up the phone and building up that rapport is really important. So that's the end of the first part of the sessions on press release tips. The second part is going to be particularly about how to tailor a press release if you're sending it to a radio station. I hope you found this session interesting and useful, and I'll see you in the second part.